Laudetur Jesus Christus. In the previous episode, we spoke about the imperfect past tense and the four conjugations that we used as sample were laudabam from laudare, videbam from videre, dicebam from dicere, and audiebam from audire. And the English rendition of these could be I used to praise, I used to see, I used to say, I used to hear. But in English we could also just simply use a past tense and say I praised, I've seen, I said, I heard. The correspondence between Latin and English is not there, and the imperfect past in Latin is used to describe an action whose duration is not certain. The so-called past perfect tense in Latin describes a single action that has taken place in the past. And this one also can be rendered in English by a simple past tense, but usually in English we add the word have. So we take the infinitive, for example, to praise, we add the letters ed, praised, and the word have. So I have praised, I have seen, I have said, I have heard. And these can be compared to the perfect tense in Latin, the so-called tempus praeteritum perfectum, which is formed in the following fashion. We take the stem of the verb, we add the letter V, and then the personal endings for this particular tense, that is for the past perfect tense. And the personal endings are I, isti, it, imus, istis, erunt. So in the case of laudare, whose stem is lauda, we get laudavi, laudavisti, laudavit, laudavimus, laudavistis, laudaverunt. In English we might say I praised, you praised, he praised, we praised, you all praised, and they praised. In the case of the fourth conjugation, audire, we have ego audivi, tu audivisti, ille audivit, nos audivimus, vos audivistis, illi audiverunt. For the second conjugation, videre, which we used as a second declension example, the pattern is not the same because videre is an irregular verb, just like in English, where to see is irregular, with see, saw, and seen. So also in Latin we have irregular verbs. The principal parts of videre are video, vides, videre, vidi, the past perfect is vidi, and visum. So in the case of videre we have ego vidi, tu vidisti, ille vidit, nos vidimus, vos vidistis, illi viderunt. Let's look also at the third conjugation sample, for which we use the verb dicere, dico, dicis, dicere, dixi, dictum. Ego dixi, I said or I have said. And by the way, you might think of the letter X as CS, as in dixi. So ego dixi, tu dixisti, ille dixit, nos diximus, vos dixistis, illi dixerunt. So to repeat the four conjugations of laudare, videre, dicere, and audire have the following endings in the past tense. Laudavi, laudavisti, laudavit, laudavimus, laudavistis, laudaverunt. Vidi, vidisti, vidit, vidimus, vidistis, viderunt. Dixi, dixisti, dixit, diximus, dixistis, dixerunt. Audivi, audivisti, audivit, audivimus, audivistis, audiverunt. You see that in some instances I have put certain letters in brackets, and that is because it is entirely legitimate in some instances to omit the V, the VI, and simply to say, as in the first conjugation we see, laudavi, laudasti, laudavit, laudavimus, laudastis, laudaverunt. Or in the fourth conjugation, audivi, audisti, audivit, audivimus, audistis, audierunt. So both the abbreviated and the full form are entirely legitimate and correct. The past tense for esse, to be, is highly irregular. It is fui. The stem is fu, and to which we add the personal endings of the past perfect tense. So we have ego fui, tu fuisti, ille fuit, nos fuimus, vos fuistis, illi fuerunt. Fui, fuisti, fuit, fuimus, fuistis, fuerunt. Let's look at a list of some other verbs and their principal parts where I have underlined the past tense. To give, do, das, dare, dedi, datus. So the past tense would be, past perfect tense would be dedi, dedisti, dedit, dedimus, dedistis, dederunt. To teach, doceo, doces, docere, docui, doctus. Second conjugation. And the past tense of docere would be docui, docuisti, docuit, docuimus, docuistis, docuerunt. To have, habere, habeo, habes, habere, habui, habitus. Also second conjugation. And the past tense, the past perfect would be habui, habuisti, habuit, habuimus, habuistis, habuerunt. To do, ago, agis, agere, egi, actus. And the past perfect, egi, egisti, egit, egimus, egistis, egerunt. To make, facio, facis, facere, feci, factus. And the past tense, feci, fecisti, fecit, fecimus, fecistis, fecerunt. Now we might know that certain similarities of pattern exist among irregular verbs. For example, docere, docui, timere, timui, florere, florui, to flourish. Habere, habui. Some verbs use the so-called principle of reduplication of the first syllable for the past tense. For example, to run is curro, curris, currere, cucurri, cursus. Past perfect is cucurri. So ego cucurri, tu cucurristi, ille cucurrit, nos cucurrimus, vos cucurristis, illi cucurrerunt, or to deceive. Fallo, fallis, fallere, fefelli, falsus. So fefelli, fefellisti, fefellit, fefellimus, fefellistis, fefellerunt, or to bite. Mordeo, mordes, mordere, momordi, morsus. Some verbs are highly irregular, such as to touch, tango, tangis, tangere, tetigi, tactus. Or to bear, to carry, ferro, fers, ferre, tuli, latus. If we add the preposition of ob, then it sounds a little more familiar to English, because then it becomes offero, offers, offerre. Obviously in English we say to offer. Offero, offers, offerre, optuli, oblatus. And from that we have oblatio, which in English is oblation, bringing up of something. So again, ferro, fers, ferre, tuli, latus. Some verbs have similar endings. I'm speaking of irregular verbs, and most of these are of the second or the third declension. The first and the fourth, not declension, conjugation. The first and the fourth conjugation are usually of a regular verb order. The one I started to speak of in the beginning, where we add the letter V and then the personal endings. But the second and the third conjugation verbs are mostly irregular or frequently. So we can notice even in those some patterns of similarity. For example, to write is scribo, scribis, scribere, scripsi, scriptum. Or to play, ludo, ludis, ludere, lusi, lusum. To send, mitto, mittis, mittere, misi, missus. To laugh, rideo, rides, ridere, risi, risum. To snatch or to grasp, carpo, carpis, carpere, carpsi, carptus. Carpe diem, we are all familiar with the saying. Or to close, claudo, claudis, claudere, clausi, clausum. It's also similar to dico, dixi, is duco, duxi, to lead or to guide. Duco, ducis, ducere, duxi, ductus. So the past perfect of ducere would be duxi, duxisti, duxit, duximus, duxistis, duxerunt. So we have introduced the first of the three so-called perfect tenses. We have three imperfect tenses, which we already spoke of: the present, the imperfect past, and the imperfect future. In the case of laudare, it was laudabam, laudabas, laudabat, laudabamus, laudabatis, laudabant for the past. For the present, laudo, laudas, laudat, laudamus, laudatis, laudant. For the future, laudabo, laudabis, laudabit, laudabimus, laudabitis, laudabunt. And now we have introduced the past perfect, which was laudavi, laudavisti, laudavit, laudavimus, laudavistis, laudaverunt. And for the second conjugation, which was videre, vidi, vidisti, vidit, vidimus, vidistis, viderunt. For dicere, the third conjugation, we have dixi, dixisti, dixit, diximus, dixistis, dixerunt. And for the fourth conjugation of audire, we have audivi, audivisti, audivit, audivimus, audivistis, audiverunt. In the next episode, I will introduce some examples so that we can not only look at the paradigmata, the conjugations of these verbs, but actually look at sentences and try to engage these forms in such a way that we begin to assimilate it in Latin. So for the next 15 minutes of Latin, valete.